So let's briefly chat a little bit about that name, Sandusky. And I want to sort of ask and just open this up to everybody. And I want to ask everybody to just maybe say a couple of words or their thoughts about, how the Sandusky case has impacted our awareness of this topic, and how can we use that awareness to move this forward, to be building better partnerships, to be building better laws, better stuff to protect our athletes and our kids. And I want to ask everybody to try and be brief if you can, because after we sort of go through, I want to open it up to questions from the audience, and I'll grab a mic and walk out. Go ahead, Matt.
All right, thanks, Chris. Yeah, since I had a personal experience with Jerry Sandusky, he was in the locker room with me. He was, on the staff. I was obviously on the other side of the ball. I was an offensive line coach. He was a defensive coordinator. I think what went wrong there, and based on the studies that I did, and I studied organizational behavior as an undergrad. I have an MBA, so I'm sort of fascinated with organizations, and the power, as mentioned earlier, the power and control dynamics that foster that kind of allowance are things that are really driven by money and greed and power, and those are things that are not going to go away tomorrow. And so we have to have people that are diligent, that are strong-minded, that are tough, that are going after these institutions on the right way, and going after people, and they're not afraid to back down. And so I know it's wonderful to put policies in place, and I agree with that. And I have a friend who coaches one of my former roommates is in New Jersey, and they just implemented, it might be your program. I don't know if New Jersey just acquired a mandated program for Safe4Athletes. But he coaches his son's soccer team, and they're mandated to go through this training. So to be brief, I think there has to be level set for behaviors that are expected of coaches and organizations. There has to be transparency and light being shed on these organizations. Who's going to monitor that is the question. And it's much better to be preventative than reactive in these situations.
Just briefly, the Sandusky scandal has to really stay afloat and be in the eye of the public. And one reason is it's such a perfect model of how other children are abused in sports and outside of sports in organizations. You have the secrecy, you have the child in awe of this authoritative figure. The parents think it's great that this child is going there to do this and to meet Sandusky and Joe Paterno. You have Joe Paterno, who is a god of football, turning his back on children, just like Bernard Cardinal Law. You have the whole issue of children feeling alone and isolated, parents not recognizing the signs of the abuse. Our culture needs to be educated. I've had many parents come to me and say, I never understood why he was washing his hands till they bled every day, or why he was taking 3-hour showers, or why he was beating the crap out of his brothers. All of a sudden he turned into an animal. But it's a perfect analogy for sexual abuse in this country with regard to organizations. Pick an organization, pick a pedophile. You have the secrecy. You have the parents supporting this child, going to see this revered figure. You have the organization turning their back on the child, even though they know the perpetrator is a pedophile. And you have the enormous damages.
The Penn State case has captured the attention of the country in a way that even the Catholic Church cases did not. Because instinctively in the United States, I do a lot of work in church-state issues. We don't want to criticize churches. We don't want to believe that priests abuse kids and that bishops lie. By the way, they all do. All bishops. Not all priests, but all bishops. So we have all these fantasy lives that we live with all of our sweet beliefs that our ministers love our kids and our rabbis are only doing the right thing for our kids. it's easier to talk about Penn State. So I hope Penn State stays in the front. And the beauty of Penn State is that we've had a criminal trial of Sandusky involving just 10 kids. 25 victims have now come forward. And now we're hearing from victims from the 1970s, 1977. So we're going to hear from at least 150 kids, victims in my view, by the end of it. But it's in court. It's in court. Neutral arbitrators, the one that's telling us what happened. And now we're going to have the higher-ups go to court, and that's going to be even better. What Spanier and Curley and Schultz did, and frankly Paterno did, we're going to learn about. And we seem to be able to look at that psychologically more clearly than when it's being given to us through a religious lens. So this is our learning opportunity. I hope everybody keeps talking about it.
You know, I watched a Sandusky victim who told me that he could throw the football 75 yards. He was invited to go to summer camp where he met Jerry Sandusky, and of course, you know what happened. After that event, he got so drunk on campus that the coaching staff of Penn State called other Division I schools and told them not to deal with this kid and don't even touch him because he's a lush. So he came back from that camp, traumatized, still traumatized, just starting therapy really. It ruins a child's life. This man was the president of his class, a great student, and right now every aspect of his life has been adversely affected by what happened one single day on the campus of Penn State University.
I think the comment I'd make about it is I'm amazed at the lack of moral courage by all of those involved in the situation. In sports, we spend so much time talking about physical courage. I think moral courage is something that ought to be built into every Little League program, and something that needs to be taught, that needs to be admired, and that needs to be left up. Teaching young children how to live out of, bring to voice their own moral ethical, their own life experiences. And the second thing, I think every coach ought to burn in the back of their eyelids is Joe Paterno's statement, "I wish I had done more." And I think every coach has this responsibility, because the first rule of every coach is to do no harm to your players, and the second is to allow no harm to be done to your players. But you think about, and I know Matt knows this, you know, the coaching staff, particularly on the collegiate level, you're spending 14, 16, 18-hour days together. There's no secrets going on there. And once that word gets out, and I just think the lack of moral courage is just remarkable to me.
So one of the things that I consistently hear is when I talk about Safe4Athletes is that doesn't happen here. And so I just want to say that you can't go and get car insurance after you've had a crash, and expect somebody else to pay for it. And so that's where I think we need to have mandated policies and procedures in place. We need to have ethics, all that in place. And you know, and I agree, it needs to stay at the forefront until people can come forward. But I can tell my experience is that there's a lot of fear. And I also experience a lot of confusion from all the calls that actually come in for resources and help or active issues with men. And there's the question of, I've called, I've talked, I've asked, you know, for help and direction, and institutions just don't listen, don't want to investigate, and don't want to pursue. And then they're calling Safe4Athletes to say, help us. We need help. And, you know, and it's the last phone call that an institution wants. And there's just sort of, I find without their behavior being held accountable, where their lack of action needs to be able to, and I hope that with the Penn State stuff, it will change that, because the consequence of the local football team, for example's coach, and them not winning versus bad-mouthing the child who's the victim. And I know in my own personal experience, having been a dual citizen. I was the ugly American, and my whole rumors of my lied sexual experiences to cover up the issue and look the other way. So I personally did not have a voice. There was no one to trust. There was no one to who would be my advocate and who would be my champion. And even if you look at the Jimmy Savile stuff that's going on over in Britain, and their sexual abuse issues in sports are just the same there as they are here. And you have somebody who told not just a social worker, their teacher, their therapist, every institution, and it took 30 years because he was such a powerful individual that people were unwilling to address the power of one person, and that's got to change.
So, you want to give
Yes.
Go ahead.
I've been saving this up, Chris. Actually, have a positive and a negative about it. Thanks, Coach Bob. On the positive side, just over a year ago, when the grand jury presentment was released, people read it. Not you and I, not the people in this room. Society at large read that report. When in any of our lives have we experienced the talk at water cools being a 28-page grand jury presentment about the rape of a child, let alone a boy? Never in our lives. So there's no doubt that that cracked the rust on the needle of this issue, and it moved it. Has it solved the problem? Certainly not. But those of us who have survived, the best thing that you can do, any of us who have spoken out publicly know, when you say something, people come to you and say, me too. And that shorthand that so many people, they were given the language both to support the people around them and the language not to find the courage or the words that may not mean anything. What does molested mean, even? To find those words, but just to say me too in a society that has now been forced to understand this issue in a different way, that is an incredible positive. And that can't be discounted. And that's the reason, like Professor Hamilton says, why this issue, why Penn State needs to stay in the news. On the negative side, I'd just like to say something about the Free report, which, for all of Louis Freeh's credentials and the millions that he was paid, he had the audacity to begin that report with a timeline, actual bullet-pointed timeline, which said 1967 or so, Jerry Sandusky arrives at Penn State, 1997, these accusations. There's 30 missing years. The story is not even close to being told yet. We know that Jerry Sandusky started the second round in 1977. So at least from there, he was setting up a feeder system of the most vulnerable boys that he could find. So the surface has still been yet to be scratched when it comes to Jerry Sandusky. Give us some
the
good
other
news,
side,
Keyon.
the negative aspect of that report is the tremendous number of people that were unable to read that report or unwilling to because they found it just too painful, too disgusting or whatever, and just immediately moved away from it. And I think that's a tremendous problem.
100%.